And that's the end of that chapter. Wow, what a just dismantling by the Florida Panthers of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Game 7. Panthers win 6-1 over the Leafs to advance to the Eastern Conference Final against the Carolina Hurricanes. I'm Julie Stewart-Binks, joined by Pierre McGuire. Pierre, and we hopped on this before we went live, just said that was torture to watch. We are obviously Toronto Sports Rush here. We're live. And there were moments of hope, but this one was just a real stinker at a very pivotal moment for this team. Where did you sort of see things start to unravel?
Right from the start of the game, the initial puck drop, you could sense that there was just no energy. There was no second and third effort. Seth Jones took charge of this game. Brad Marchand took charge of this game. If the Leafs did have chances, Bobrovsky looked big as a house, and they didn't have that many. When I heard the attempted shot totals after 40 minutes were 75 for Florida, that's the largest attempted shot total of any team in the league during the regular season and the postseason. I was not encouraged after 40 minutes. I wasn't encouraged after 20 minutes. And to be totally honest with you, Julie, I wasn't encouraged after 10 minutes. I was disappointed in the start of the game for Toronto. I don't know what happened, but something clearly happened.
Right. And the start was completely dominated by Florida, as you mentioned. They had the first 7 shots on goal. They pinned the Leafs into their zone. It was absolute chaos. They could not get the puck out. But then they were able to change like the tide. Um, I know that like there's a lot of things for us to get into here, but let's go into this. It felt like after they withstood that initial storm from Florida, that maybe as they started to get some attempts and they evened out the shot total, that they were going to get back into this one, and that maybe they actually took the momentum away from Florida. Did you ever feel that?
A little bit. Kenny Albert made a really good point on the American show, and he said that Toronto had the first 7 shots against, but then they had the next 7 shots for. And I thought that was a really relevant point because you could see there was a little bit of a bubbling that was starting to happen. I thought Austin Matthews and Marner had a little something going. I thought Willie Nylander and Johnny Tavares had something going. I thought the fourth line with Scotty Lawton had something going. And Lorentz obviously had a breakaway that got shut down. And then after that, it just dissipated. You made a good point before we came on the air. Things kind of changed a little bit when Chris Rooney got high stick, the official, from what I understand. And I've texted Chris right now before we came on. Haven't heard back from him yet. It's not damage to the eye. Just got sutures above the eye, which is great news.
Yeah.
And that's all I was thinking about for him. I've known Chris a long time. But I thought things kind of changed. The crowd kind of got docile. The team kind of got docile, and it kind of played into the strength of the Florida Panthers a little bit. I thought it was a great point that you had raised.
Right. I mean, that's what it kind of felt like. You have these moments in games that are sort of like they kill off that penalty at the end of the first period, the
Yep.
Leafs, and they're able to get out it being 0-0, and you're like, okay, they withstood all that. And then I don't know, I just got this weird vibe when, of course, obviously I was very scared for Chris Rooney and obviously was just hoping and praying that he was okay. And that's the biggest thing in that moment, obviously. And then it just felt like maybe, I don't know, things kind of just the vibe in the room or the vibe in the rink, everything changed. And then not long after, Seth Jones scores for Florida, and he was incredible in this game tonight. And even just like from that, and there's okay, so Seth Jones, in your opinion, what made him so effective in this game tonight?
He had great gaps in the neutral zone, forced a lot of turnovers, played to his strength. His strength is his size, his skating ability, and his lateral mobility. He scores a goal off the rush because of his skating ability and also because of a bad read by Morgan Riley. And I know that Brandon Carlo's taken most of the blame for that goal, but I would tell anybody, I'll go in the film room with you and I'll show you why it's more Morgan Riley than it is Brandon Carlo. And I'm a huge Morgan Riley guy, but he made a bad read and you can't step up. And I know he's got near side contained, but you can't step up if you don't have any forward support through the middle of the ice because you're going to create a 2-on-1. And that's exactly what happened. So he makes a bad read. And then obviously Jones's size, skating ability, and shooting ability kicks in, and he blows one over the blocker of Joseph Woll, and it's 1-0. And right then, 75% of the time in a game 7, when you score the first goal, you're winning. And everybody in the NHL knows that stat.
Right, but then they also had the stat that stat was 0-2 this year.
This
So that
year,
was, which I love when things like that happen, because then at least like the storyline of the game feels like, okay, it's not over, right? After, just because that is obviously very much in favor of team scoring first. But then things started to unravel very quickly, and Anton Lundell makes it 2-0. And okay, you talked about Brandon Carlo. Tell me, what did you think about his game on like both of these goals? Okay, and obviously he did make a great save. Okay, the butt save was great. It could have been way worse. It doesn't matter in the big scheme of things. But I felt like Brandon Carlo, and tell me if I'm wrong, just on these two goals. You did tell me in the first one it was more Morgan Riley, but I just felt like he did have a great game in that part.
No, he didn't. He did not. He did not, and he was icing the puck at times when he didn't have to. I thought he was slow to lose pucks. I didn't think he cleared the crease very well. So he was definitely one of the guys that didn't help. I thought Simon Benoit, for all the great things he did throughout the entire series, his game 7 was probably his worst game 7. He didn't handle the puck particularly well. He was making bad reads down low and switch calls. So there are a lot of things that I didn't like from the Leafs perspective. But the biggest thing to me, Julie, when you're playing in a game 7, if you have a bad start, it's hard to get back in the game. It's just there's so much against you. And you could see the confidence surge, Marchand's confidence surge, Reinhardt's confidence surge, Barkov. You just see it. Seth Jones hasn't played this well probably
Yeah.
since he was part of the Columbus Blue Jackets and they beat the Toronto Maple Leafs back in the COVID year. This is probably the best game he's played since then. That's a
Right.
long time ago.
Yeah, it certainly was. Feels like a different planet ago as well. And it's just crazy because also then the additions, him and Brad Marchand, Brad had 3 points, and also now is 5-0 in game sevens against against the Leafs. He is the ultimate Leaf killer. He has he deserves it. I mean, as you mentioned, those guys came to play. And when you look at how things were so different in game 6, like, how does a team show up like the Leafs did in game 6 and then show up like this in game 7 at
One of the
home?
things that really, and it's a great point that you're raising, one of the things that really helped them in game 6, Julie, the penalty kills in the first period. You think about it. Usually it's hard to get momentum on the road when you're always playing against the other team's power play, but the Leafs relished that. And it took the crowd out of it in Florida. And it took until the start of the third period for Austin Matthews to score to make it 1-0 when the crowd really got out of it. But those penalty kills allowed the Leafs to get into the game. That was kind of like them scoring tonight. They weren't able to do it until late in the game by Domi. The damage was already done. They didn't do enough at the start of the game to get their crowd into the game. And that was a problem. The start's really important in these kinds of games.
Right. And it's just it felt like, 'cause I was at the game, game
They were
5.
in game 5. Game
This has been
5.
a very busy week. I was at game 5. It was 6-1, but I was just texting my cousins that I'd gone with. And because it wasn't an elimination game, we were able to we enjoyed ourselves. I thought, if I'm paying this much for tickets, we cheered for the goal, the Robertson goal. Like, we enjoyed ourselves, but obviously this was a very different situation. I'm not a fan of booing your own team. I'm not. I feel like that's gonna work against them. I don't think they're gonna get fired up to play better. Yeah, on that note in particular, how do you how do you deal with the fact that these fans are, like, throwing jerseys on the ice during the game and they're booing their team? Like, I don't even know where you begin because they're just so disgruntled that it's hard to even stop them from doing that.
One of the great parts about playing in a city like Toronto is the passion of their fans and the intensity of the fan base. It's also part of the problem of playing in that market. It's,
Yeah.
you don't have that in a lot of the other markets in the league. Most of the Canadian marketplaces are like that, but not all of them. And so I would say that's a bit of an issue. But I don't know how you legislate against it. As a coach, you just prepare your players to go out for the next shift and the next shift, and
Yeah.
that's your job. That's your job. The one thing I want to say though, and I should have said this earlier. This series was 2-0 Toronto, and you
Mhm.
asked me, "Is Florida in trouble?" And I said, "No, they're not, because they hadn't lost on home ice yet." And then they went home and did a real good job, but they were very fortunate to get out of game 3. They were very fortunate. It was the overtime game. They win the game in overtime. Then they got confidence going into game 4, and they win game 4, and they come up to Toronto in game 5, and they blackjack shellac Toronto. They just didn't beat them. They beat them bad. But this whole thing, I think this series swung in game 3.
Yeah.
Paul Maurice decided, I'm taking my fourth line and I'm taking all the skill guys off and I'm putting on hard edge guys. I'm putting on AJ Greer, I'm putting on Thomas Nosek, and I'm putting on Jonah Gadjevich. Go look at the stat line from game 3 to game 7 of all those 3 players. It's scary to see how much contribution those guys made. And it wasn't just points, because they got a lot of points, and they got another one tonight by a goal from Gadjevich. Go watch how many hits they accumulate. Go watch how many faceoffs Nosek wins. Go look at the time on ice for Thomas Nosek. The Leafs didn't have an answer for that, and this was a year they were supposed to have an answer for that.
Right.
They
I was
didn't
just
have the answer for that.
sorry to interrupt. I was just gonna ask you, with Paul Maurice making that adjustment, what adjustment should Craig Berube have made?
I don't know. I don't know if he could have done anything else. This is my point. That comes down to internal organizational depth. I just don't know if they had enough internal organizational depth to do it. I thought they had great roster flexibility, and we saw it from time to time over the course of 82 games. Domi could play first line right wing, played third line center. Pacioretty could be on your third line on the right wing. You know, he could move Bobby McMahon up and play second line left wing. There were all these different things, permutations they could do. I didn't see that in the playoff. I don't
I
know if you agree with me, but I didn't see that kind of aggressive coaching maneuvering. And I'm not blaming any of this, by the way, on the coaching staff, but I didn't see that in the playoffs like I did see it in the regular season.
Right, you didn't actually see a lot of changes until even just this, like, last 3rd period when, Domi was then playing on a line with McMahon and Nylander, which, was a new permutation in that regard, and that worked because Domi scored. But, like, in the bigger scheme of things, okay, so we looked at this series, they were up 2-0. We look at that one coaching change that, Paul Maurice made with his team, but they still lost, like, they still gave Toronto an opportunity, it still went 7. Why overall do you think this series was just such a roller coaster that coming into this game 7, I talked to a lot of people that really did believe that even after the Leafs put up that stinker in game 5 and they came back in game 6, but that they could win game 7. Felt like this whole series was just a roller coaster of chaos you could never predict.
No, honestly thought the Leafs would win in game 7. I really did. I thought it was a home ice series. I didn't like the fact the Leafs lost game 5 on home ice, but if I were
Mhm.
a Florida fan, I wouldn't have liked the way my team lost game 6 being shut out 2-0 down in South Florida in Sunrise. But again, it requires you to start. The start's the thing in a game 7. The start is critically important in a game 7, and the Leafs start wasn't not good enough, and they were right behind the 8 ball right from the first face-off. They really were.
How does that happen in a game 7? And it how because it's happened in other games where they hadn't shown up and it was like, "Oh, the start is so important, the start is so important." Well, you didn't start on time again in the most important game in franchise history since '93. Why?
I think the big question has to be asked of the guys that, are on the ice, and
Mhm.
that's something that needs to be asked tonight post-game. What happened at the start? And when you did fall behind 1-0, why were they able to grow the lead to 3-0 and
Right.
almost 4-0 on the Seth Jones goal, no goal? So what happened? Like, were you guys that stunned? Did you get punched right in the mouth and you couldn't get it back? There's some hard questions that'll have to be asked, not just by the reporters, internally by upper management, and maybe even above that from ownership. What happened to this team? What happened to this team?
Yeah, it felt like that just no one really knows, like, what happened to them and what this is, but, like, what do you make of Austin Matthews? Let's look at him first. This game, this series, his future. I mean, this guy's got he's wearing the C. He's gotta show up. he did last game, but not in this game. What do you think was maybe, how was his game neutralized by Florida?
Well, first of all, he's going head to head mostly against Barkov. Barkov's one of the best defensive two-way players in the league. Not only can he manufacture offense, he can also obviously be tremendously difficult to play against defensively. I didn't think Toronto spent nearly enough time in the Florida zone. That's where Austin does a lot of his damage. They didn't get enough of a cycle game going, Julie. That was a big problem, I thought, especially in the games the Leafs lost. They didn't spend nearly enough time cycling the puck and dominating, which allows Austin to come off the wall and shoot the puck. I saw one or two instances tonight where he's able to shoot the puck, but not with the same velocity as I've seen before. I don't think he was 100%, but I don't think Austin Matthews is going anywhere. Yeah, just like I don't think Matthew Nyes is going anywhere. If we're going to get into that, I think I'd be surprised if Mitchell Marner were back in Toronto, though.
Okay, yeah, I mean, natural follow-up, what do you think happens with Marner after this?
Either they find a way to facilitate a trade to a team that thinks they have the ability to sign him, or he just walks away in free agency.
Oh, that would be tough if he walked away because he did, teams were inquiring about him, yeah,
Mhm.
at the deadline, which we know about, like Carolina, one of them. Um, what like Mitch Marner had hedged his bets a bit. Like he had an opportunity to lock things up during the season. Agent and him, they decided not to. They're gonna wait to the postseason. And then just like every other year, he didn't really show up. I barely even noticed him in this game, to be honest. At
Probably,
points,
you
I
know,
thought,
you
"Is he
probably
even playing?"
yeah, no, you probably notice him the most when he's upset at his teammates on the bench. That's probably the time you notice him the most. You're like, how come he can't bring that same energy to, down low coverage, or he can't bring that same energy to opportunities off the cycle or get to the front of the opposition net? Why does he bring that same energy? I don't want to beat him up because I think there are other things that are wrong with this team right now. And I part of it, and you know what, I don't like to overreact, but I think part of it's going to be we're going to find out there are a lot of guys that were not anywhere close
Yeah.
to 100%. And that's
Right.
why I like to be really measured when I do these post game debriefs because I've been in the room before and I know what guys look like and how they feel. And sometimes people get it wrong, they really do. So that's my biggest thing is just to wait and see what the results are of the debrief from the players to the media about injuries. But here's what I do know. They got big questions. John Tavares is a big question. Mitchell Marner is a big question. And I think they got some questions still on defense. I'm worried. I want to hear about Morgan Riley's health. I did not think he had a very good series, and I'm a huge Morgan Riley fan.
Right, and a lot of those, like, we'll find out different things about their injuries and whatnot, but, like, that is also a thing everyone's going through. Because I know everyone had said, "Well, Austin's dealing with something." It's like, well, Matthew Tkachuk's dealing with something, everyone's dealing with something, so it sort of is levels, like, the playing field in a way. But overall, I wonder, do we when you look at the fact that they played very well this regular season to the point that they won the Atlantic Division and avoided facing Florida in the first round. But was this almost inevitable that this Florida team, this defending Stanley Cup champion team, and the way they play was on a collision course to knock off the Leafs in that maybe we're being almost too hard on the Leafs and how they're playing and not giving Florida enough credit.
Oh no, I want to go there. I want to give Florida a ton of credit, and that's why I brought up Paul making the strategical change that I thought he made after game two by changing all three fourth line players. Those guys made a massive difference. Gadjevich made a huge difference. Greer made a huge difference, and Nosek made a huge difference. Those three guys made massive, massive differences. And the guys that came out, Boquist came out and he scored a huge goal, obviously
Mhm.
for Florida. You look at Sturm. Nico Sturm came out and he hadn't done much. And they took the young kid out of the University of Michigan. So they took Mackie Samoskevich. They took those three guys out and they put in three bigger, harder, older, more mature guys, and you see the difference. It's a massive difference. And
Right,
I
and
just don't know if Toronto couldn't measure up to that.
they don't let anyone have they don't let anyone have the puck. Like, their identity is so intact. They're relentless. They're, you know, the the team defense that they play. They're just so locked in. They just look bigger. They're stronger. They're like the 50-50 battles. There are it's though not 50-50, it's 100% Florida basically that second period. Um how do how does Florida do that? And then, like, sometimes the Leafs in other parts of the series have been able to push back against them. But then when Florida is able to play the game the way they want to play, they just dismantle the Leafs. But like I just don't understand how sometimes Toronto was able to match up against them and then nights like tonight they just had nothing in that second period.
The operative word you use is sometimes. And sometimes is because they don't have that same depth that Florida had. That's why I thought after game 2, the strategic move by Paul Maurice to change his fourth line and to put in guys that are bigger, faster, stronger, more mature made a massive difference because they could sustain their physicality.
Mm,
They could go after Tanev. They could go after McCabe. They could go after Riley. They could go after Simon Benoit, who was starting to become a physical menace against them. And they planted a seed of doubt. And I've told you this a bunch of times. 3 things you want to accomplish in a
yeah.
playoff series: concern, doubt, and fear. And you saw it tonight. If you're a fan of the Toronto Maple Leafs, you saw they were concerned. You saw they were doubting. And at the
Bing,
end,
bing.
you knew they were fearful that this was over.
I
They knew.
listened to your post game with Kyle, and I heard you say that of, game 5, and I sent you a text just saying, "Check mark, check mark, check mark." They'd already they ticked those things off in earlier on in the series. But question, what do you how do you think the series would have been different if Anthony Stolarz had been healthy?
I think they might have won game 3, Toronto, that is. I believe they would have. And then I think they win the series. But it just shows you how finite the lines are. And Joe Woll, he'll be the first guy to tell you, Joe Woll didn't play a very good game 3. He'll be the first guy to tell you
Oh,
that.
yeah.
But after that, I think he played his butt off. He played very, very well. They don't win. I don't believe they win game 6 down in Florida if it's not for Joseph Woll. So there's a lot that I liked about his game, but you asked a really pointed question that I think deserves a real good answer, and that is, I believe they win game 3, and I believe they win the series. But they didn't win game 3, and they didn't win the series, and Stolarz is part of that storyline.
Right. And it does really come down to these moments. Like it's kind of like sliding doors, right? Like if Stolarz is in and they win that game and then they win the next one, like as you just mentioned, it's a completely different series. But that wasn't the case. He goes out, Wool comes in, and they don't win this series. So when you're management or when you're the organization looking, the owners, everyone looking at this team, how easy is it to forget about the moments and to just sort of be like, "Well, we can't win game 7s. Our team isn't tough. We have to blow it up."
Blow up is a big word. I'm not sure I'd be using that. This is still a team that won the Atlantic Division. This is still a team that would have been a home ice team had they won tonight against Carolina. Carolina would have been coming to play game 1 Tuesday night in Toronto. So I'm not sure blow ups right. And I know you're not using that, but I think people in the marketplace will use that. And I
Yeah.
don't think it's the appropriate term. I think there needs to be some refining. I think there needs to be some adjustment. I think they took a huge step towards that last summer. Adding Tanev, I think, was a huge thing. Oliver Ekman-Larsson clearly had something wrong with him. You could just see as the series went along, he wasn't nearly the same player. But there's gonna be some movement there. You know there is, and I think they just have to continue to get harder, faster, stronger, and maintain players that are coachable, that are going to buy into what Craig Berube and his staff are selling, because it's an elite coaching staff. It really is.
Right, so then when you do look at the core 4, and I know Berube didn't wanna have that term, but, like, if you look at the guys that they have that they're putting a lot of their money in, and we know we you mentioned that about Marner. Not necessarily sure about his future in Toronto, but knowing that they're gonna be going up against a team like Florida, like, we know how the playoffs work. It's gonna be Florida, Boston, like, doesn't matter who it is even in the Atlantic Division, everyone's so hard to play against. In what way would you maybe look at where your money's going, and where would you maybe change that and say, "All right, well, guys like a Tanev, obviously he's a defenseman, but, like, guys that are playing like this are helping us more than, say, number 16 and number 34."
Yeah, well, 34 is still a game breaker. You gotta have those guys. Difference
Yeah,
makers are hard to find. The Boston Bruins still rue the day they traded Joe Thornton. I know they won a Stanley Cup and they went to the final 2 other times, but think about how many cups potentially they would have won had they kept Joe Thornton because, when they won the cup, Brad Stewart wasn't in Boston, Marco Sturm wasn't in Boston, and Wayne Primo wasn't in Boston. So, Joe Thornton, when he was traded away, was an MVP of the National Hockey League and has over 1,000 points in his career. So those guys are hard to find. Austin Matthews is kind of trending the same way. They're hard
right, of
guys
course,
to
yeah.
find. So I wouldn't be in a rush to move him. But what I would say though, there's going to be some fine tuning to get harder, to get tougher, and to continue to evolve that way. I don't think they have many answers down in the American Hockey League right now. I do think potentially Easton Cowan can be part of that equation, which is really positive for them. And I think they've got some really good depth defensemen that have the potential to come up and play. And they've got really good depth in goal. You got to admit that. They've got very good depth in goal. Stolar still has a year left on his contract. So does Joe
Right.
Woll. They're coming in at 5 million combined. So there's a lot to like about Toronto.
Yeah,
I know
it's
people
so
want to doom and gloom, but there's a lot to like.
no, and I agree with you on that because I think it's like it's really hard to analyze this team because they accomplished so many great things this year. But then as you accomplish more and more things, the bar gets higher and higher. And at the only thing that would satisfy this fan base is a Stanley Cup, and that's just not where they are right now, like, with what
Yeah.
they have, and with what they've even done from last year to this year, and they won a series, they won the Atlantic Division, they got to a game 7 against the defending Stanley Cup champions, and I don't wanna be, like, trying to sugarcoat a 6-1 game 7 loss on home ice, but there's something to be said about this year not being as bad as it feels like everyone's making it out to be.
The year was good. The playoff in this series after game 2 was a roller coaster that you described very appropriately. And so I wonder, how do you get better from that? And I think you have to analyze who stepped up and who didn't.
Mm.
Tanev and McCabe were tremendous together. I think they both were broken down by the end. They're just
Yeah.
so physical, and the shot blocking was insane. Oliver Ekman Larsson was broken down at the end. Like, these guys had to overmax. They were maxed out basically. I think a big reason why is there still has to be some additions up front.
Yeah.
There still has to be.
Right. I mean, some of their additions definitely worked out, like, that 4th line was looking good, like,
They got better. Yes.
yeah, Lawton was doing well in the playoffs. Yeah, it's because when you put it into perspective and things like with Ruby coming in with some of the additions and having a goalie and Stolarz and by the time he was out, like, well, maybe it wasn't as bad. But then when you just see how that game went, it's like, is it better to lose in a blowout like this or to like lose in triple overtime? I think it's probably better to lose in triple overtime now having seen what it's like for this team to lose 6-1 because it just feels like this isn't fun to watch anymore. Like, it's not even fun as a hockey fan because it's so lopsided. Um, yeah, I don't know what to even say kind of about this right now. I'm disappointed because I definitely not because we're Toronto team, like, a Toronto team, a Toronto show, but, like, I had a lot more hope for them this year.
I think you had so much hope that when you saw game 5 and you saw game 7, and then you saw the combined score of 12-2 in favor of Florida, you get angry and there's angst and
Right.
there's so much passion built up and there's so much animus and you're like, we're not that bad, but we really were that bad, but we're not that bad. So you're kind of caught. I get it. I totally get it. So this is where calm, cooler heads have to prevail, and you can't overreact as a management person. I get it as a fan. I totally get it as a fan, but as a management person, calm, cool, collected, identify strengths, identify weaknesses, work to adjust on the weaknesses. And I believe they can. There's a lot to like about this team. You can say whatever you want. There's a lot to like. And every night, think about it. If you really want to be fair as a fan, think about all the magical nights you had during the regular season and how much fun you enjoyed having watched these guys play. Because there was a lot of fun to be had watching these guys
It
play during
was
the
it's
season.
so isn't it Pierre, weird, like, doing a postmortem right now like this when you're like, "Oh my gosh, we watched so many Leafs games this year, and there were some great stories, and there were some, highs and lows," but then you go back to those games in, like, January and February, and you're thinking, "Oh my gosh, we spent so much time watching this team." And then this is where it, like, ends up. You kinda think it's just it kind of it just a lot goes into winning the cup. A lot. And
Yeah,
and,
good fortune too. You gotta have some
y
good luck to win, you know?
yes,
You gotta have a
yeah,
lot of good luck. Think about this for 1 second. 2 things happen in the first round that haven't happened in the last 75 years of the National Hockey League. We had 2 teams, Winnipeg and Dallas, come from behind in the last period of a game in a game 7 to win, and then to win in overtime.
I know.
Not just to win, twice in the first round that happened, hadn't happened in 75 years.
Right. Yeah, and
So
pucks
you got there's
bouncing
some weird
in
stuff.
or
Everybody
different
know Dallas is the model team. Everybody's talking about it. They're the model team because they're going to they've been 3 times in a row Western Conference Final. They shouldn't have won the first round. When
right.
Nathan McKinnon scored to make it 2-0 against Dallas, that game should have been locked down and over.
Yeah.
But then Mikko Rantanen, who got traded out of Colorado, figured that out, went on a run. And he
Right.
didn't want to stay in Carolina. So he goes back to Dallas and plays against his old team. I'm just trying to show you, you got to be careful that you don't, not you personally, but people, I get the passion part. I get it. But there's a lot that's right about this team too. There's a lot that's right. There's more right about this team than there is wrong. There
Right.
is.
Yeah, I know I have to kind of, walk my mom off the ledge because she's just like, "I can't watch another one of these game 7s, and I can't watch." And I said, like, "No, mom, it's okay. Like, I know that this is really difficult." And Leafs fans have the right to feel upset, but then I think you gotta, as you said, have perspective, like, go to bed angry, have that, those emotions, feel them, but then, like, really, as you said, management and cooler heads prevail, have to actually look at this. One big kind of final question-ish I wanna ask you is, like, they in the States on TNT, they showed a shot at Brendan Shanahan at the end. What do you think is his future?
Don't know. I would never speculate on another person's future in the National Hockey League. I've walked that tightrope for over 30 years. I just don't think it's fair to do that to somebody. What I would say is it's been very incomplete since he's taken over the team. The results clearly have not been there. He came in with a plan. He's had the ability to hire the coaches, and they've hired different guys, different types of coaches along the way. And it just hasn't worked. It hasn't worked. So I think that's part of what has to be discussed with Keith Pelly and ownership and Brad Treliving and Brendan's got to be involved in those talks too. But they need to sort this out. They need to sort it out going
How will
forward.
they I guess I should have asked the question, like, more like, how would the discussions about his future go? Like, where do they look? If you can't objectively well, I mean, you can objectively say, like, where you went out in different rounds, but, like, you haven't won a cup, but, like, where are you looking at points as, like as as, um as, like, discussion points of whether or not this is working or not?
First question I have is, was this, since you've been here, has this been the vision that you've had for the type of team you wanted to build? That'd be the first question I asked. Then it'd be like, what do you see as the most important thing for our team to have going forward? And if he answers X, say, well, how come you haven't done it? How
Mm,
come that hasn't been done yet? And hopefully he has an answer for that. But you've got to react to the way he answers your questions because he has had the power. You got to think about this for 1 second. He brought in Lou Lamoriello. He let him go. He brought in Kyle Dubas. He let him go. He brought in Brad Treliving. Brad, I think, has done some nice things in terms of
mhm.
accomplishment. And I don't know what's going to happen long term, but I think Brad deserves more time in his position.
Yeah.
I think he made some really good acquisitions. So the question for Brendan is, you let this person go, you let that person go, you let this coach go, you let that coach go. Now, what's your vision for the future? And if you don't like some of the answers, then you have to have a hard discussion about
Right.
which way you want to go.
That's great. That was really informative, to understand kind of what it's like in the room with that kind of stuff. And then it's kind of, as you mentioned, just what do you see next? Like we're here right now, and then like, okay, we can go through everything that's happened, but as you mentioned, almost like what's your PowerPoint on where we're going from here? And as you said, ownership, and Keith Belly, they look at this, and if that's not what they want, then obviously they figure that out. One more because we didn't really touch on it that much, but John Tavares, um, his regular season was amazing. He seemed like he was a little bit laboring near the end. A lot of miles on that body this year. How do you think he should be, I don't want to say rewarded, but treated in terms of a contract by either this team or any other team?
With respect, number one, he's an iconic player. You can have questions about a lot of guys that wear Maple Leaf sweaters over the last 10 to 12 years. You can never question his heart, his desire, and his pride in being a Leaf. You can never do that, ever. I love what you just said. He's nicked up. He's definitely beat up. You could tell he had lost a gear over the
Mhm.
course of this series. You could definitely see that. Um, I'd like to think they give him an opportunity to come back. I think he's probably best slotted as a number three right now, with less pressure on him to evolve offensively or have to be a go-to guy offensively. You know, when Austin Matthews went down, I thought
Oh,
he was a
yeah.
tremendous player for this team. He's a tremendous player. So I think there's way more upside with him being a Leaf than not being a Leaf. And one of the things that I think is and I just asked the fans to think about this for 1 second because it's been overlooked. Was there a person that handled the passing of the captaincy better than what John Tavares did in Toronto when Austin Matthews was given the C? That should be the template for how every person handles themselves professionally and in life. That was an amazingly positive thing that he did. And I think it helped the team over the course of the year. I really do.
Right. That was a hugely selfless thing for him to do, and then to also, he was supportive and then performed on the ice. Like, some guys could have just let their career go down the toilet and sulk and like, be upset about it. But that showed a lot of character, right? When we look at players that you want on teams, and that I think stands out above a lot of this kind of stuff. But then him, as you mentioned, I totally forgot how he had taken over when Austin was was out. Like the season is so long and so short at the same like time. Like it's just like there's so many different things that go on that you
Really,
like. Oh,
you know what's amazing though, Julie? There were people in the media that were saying John Tavares should be on the Four Nations tournament team
yeah, I
because he
thought he
was
should have
playing
been.
so well.
Yeah, and I
I mean,
forgot about that, like, how
people
good.
were like, "This guy should be on there." There was almost an outcry. Why isn't he on the Four Nations event team? And I'm like, "Because hey, Mark Scheifele wasn't on that team. Tommy
Yeah,
Wilson wasn't on that
yeah,
team. Like
Adam Lowry wasn't.
Nick Suzuki wasn't on that team. Adam Lowry wasn't on that team. Canada could send 2 or 3 teams. I mean,
Mhm,
that's how good Canada is.
that's true, that's true.
But
Okay,
that's how well Johnny played this year.
yeah,
So
yeah,
can you
that's
imagine just for one, just if people could wrap their head around this, I know they're all upset. I totally get it. John Tavares in the 3 hole at, I don't know, $3.5 million, $4 million. I think he would do it.
yeah, he definitely I mean, I think he'd wanna stay. I have no idea what these guys want or like, I've no people it's like, I have no idea what Mitch Marner if he wants to stay or not, you know?
Well,
I mean, I think
I think after tonight, he doesn't wanna stay.
I would also agree with that. I'd say at some point this has really gotta get to you, and just you playing, and I'm sure they're really frustrated with themselves and they're not trying to play poorly, right? Like, but I don't know how they get to that next level. It was a tough one. I guess parting thoughts in our postmortem of just our fresh this is like fresh off the press, basically. We'll be able to break down things more when we hear some of the quotes, we find out how guys were doing. But Pierre, what's sort of maybe your biggest takeaway from this Leafs playoff series? And I guess we'll just leave it at Leafs playoff series. And
I wish that Anthony Stolars hadn't have been hurt. I wish the Leafs would have won game 3. I have a ton of respect for the Florida Panthers and Paul Maurice in particular and the way he coached in this series. I thought his adjustment after game number 2 by flipping his entire fourth line changed the entire schematic of this series because it became a battle of attrition, especially for the Leaf defense. They went right after them. They didn't do that as much through games 1 and 2, but in 3 you could see it was starting to fester, and then in 4, it was definitely apparent, and in 5, it took over. It was like a forest fire that couldn't be stopped. So I think Paul deserves credit there. Matthew Nye showed me so much. The courage he had, there's clearly not 100%. That kid's a keeper. I could
Yeah.
see the Leafs building around Nyes, Matthews, and Nylander going forward. I think Easton Cowan's a guy that eventually fills in and comes in. There's still some room for growth on their defense. But I think by and large, this is a team that got a chance to be even better next year if they make the right adjustments in the offseason. I would be very surprised if Mitchell Marner were back with the Toronto Maple Leafs next year.
Some very salient points, and also a reminder that they are very, very close to I being the best team in the league. I mean, they just lost to the best defending Stanley Cup champion team, but they're very, very close, and that's something that, like, is very easy to oversee and get overshadowed because these losses were historically torturous for this
Yes.
Leafs fan base. We also have to give that credit too. Can't just sweep that under the rug.
No.
Those were they were embarrassed at home, and that's something that that city and those fans won't forget. But maybe it's something that they can hopefully, to their credit, use to be able to get this to the next level. Pierre, thank you so much for all your insight and analysis on this game and beyond and everything in the season. We're going to be able to do this more tomorrow and kind of break it down a lot more. But appreciate you taking us inside the room too about what it would be like with conversations and always coming game ready. It's been a pleasure doing these shows with you, and it's too bad we couldn't do more of them, but we got at least we got 2 rounds of it.
Hey, and we're gonna have tomorrow morning. I'm looking forward to that as well.
Yeah,
The sun's coming up tomorrow. We're gonna know more
the sun
information
is
from the
coming up
sun
tomorrow.
coming up
It is
tomorrow.
another day. Thank you all for watching. We still have tons of content for Toronto Sports Rush, obviously, and there's going to be lots of news coming in the future. We'll figure out the future of some of these names that we talked about with Marner and Tavares and the future of the team. So make sure you like and subscribe, and you'll get news here first from best experts in the league. Pierre McGuire here, Julie Stewart-Binks signing off for Toronto Sports Rush. We'll see you guys next time.